WWF Raw, released in 1995 for the Sega 32X courtesy of Acclaim Entertainment, is the enhanced version of the game that graced the Super Nintendo and Sega Genesis consoles the previous year. How so? Well, this one has more Quang. You know, Quang? Puerto Rican ninja? No? Oh. To be honest with you, I don't know what they did here that makes it better enough to justify getting this on the 32X. You have some of the usual minor graphical and audio enhancements here and there. There is an additional hidden character in the aforementioned Quang that you fight as a boss or can unlock with a hidden code. Other than that, WWF Raw is the fourth and final game in Acclaim's WWF series of 16-bit wrestling games that also comprise Super WrestleMania, Royal Rumble, and the Sega CD exclusive Rage in the Cage. Raw comprises a roster of 12 WWF superstars, as well as the additional hidden Quang, featuring the same roster from the 16-bit versions, which features some of the major names of the time, from Brett to Shawn to Taker, and also notably Luna Vachon, whose inclusion perplexes me since she's the only female talent in the game. Not even the women's champion at the time, Alundra Blaze, makes a sniff here, and this was long before that incident. Raw features a number of match types, the usual suspects: singles, tag matches, Survivor Series elimination matches, Royal Rumbles, and brawls, which let you use weapons. And of course there's the single-player tournament mode, which is the usual beat everyone to win the belt, with Quang being your final opponent, because this game takes place in an alternate reality where Quang is the reigning WWF World Heavyweight Champion. Oh yeah, that's gonna put butts in seats. Huh. Other than that, pretty standard stuff for the time, nothing really special or anything like that, and certainly nothing you wouldn't find on the 16-bit versions. Raw is a wrestling game of sorts where you have to defeat your opponent via pinfall, submission, or countout. In brawls, you can also knock out your opponent for the victory. Grappling is handled by walking into your opponent, which will cause a meter to pop up, during which time you mash buttons to fill your side of the meter. It's in a sort of tug-of-war because your opponent is trying to fill that same meter, and whoever's side gets the meter filled gets to pull off a move, depending on the button and the combination you pressed. It's not the most refined grappling system or anything like that, but it gets the job done somewhat, and it does somewhat function. Raw also happens to support the 6-button controller, which I'd recommend over the stock 3-button controller, since more buttons allows for more stuff to be done much more easily. Generally, all the superstars share the same basic movesets. It's been like this since Super WrestleMania. But they do have differences. Notably, superstars have different stats, so some will move faster, others will hit harder, and so on and so forth. So they feel somewhat different from each other. Each superstar also has their own finisher, or special move as the game calls it, which can be performed when your opponent's health is low and under the right conditions, i.e. during a grapple or when somebody's on the ground and you have to pull off a top rope move, that sort of thing. Finally, each superstar has a unique mega move executed with a specific button command and also under certain conditions depending on the move. They're a nice little extra, but nothing that really enhances the game or anything. They're like the weapons at ringside, something that's there but not really a game changer, nor something that's really necessary to ultimately win the match, or the game, or whatever you want to call it. Graphically speaking, Raw looks fine with its wrestlers looking somewhat like who they're supposed to, though the somewhat janky animation might turn off a few folks, though that's been a trait that's been with the series since day one. If you were to compare this to the Genesis version, there are notable updates to the overall visual quality. The intro looks much better, the character portraits are of higher quality somewhat, the colors are a little richer, and sometimes the arena itself will undergo some changes, differing ring colors, and even different commentary teams at ringside, alternating between the duo of Vince McMahon and Jerry the King Lawler, or Gorilla Monsoon and one of the lady announcers that was around during that time whose name I don't recall, sadly. Hey look, unless it's the body or the brain, anyone paired up with Gorilla is instantly forgettable, and 1995 WWF is not an era I tend to revisit or be familiar with. This version is missing the pre-match bits from the commentary desk, which I kinda liked as a bit, so it's not a perfect transition, but other than that, the game in general looks fine. Not a huge leap in quality over what came before, but it's okay looking. Sound-wise, there's not much to look at here. The various sound effects used in-game were almost copy and pasted from the last game, the same punches and slam sounds along with the same universal grunts used by all the wrestlers. They sound a little better, I guess? Kind of, sort of. The wrestler themes sound decent enough, close to the real versions, but still somewhat different sounding. Not much else to say there, really. Overall, WWF Raw is a perfectly fine wrestling game, and as I've said about the game in the past, it's pretty much the best entry in that overall series of WWF video games from Acclaim. With that having been said, this 32X iteration might have a few enhancements to its credit, but not quite enough to justify its existence, especially if you already have the SNES or Genesis versions on hand, which are more than adequate. Well, the Super Nintendo version at least. I haven't played the Genesis one yet, but still the point stands. On its own merits, it's a fairly decent game with a good number of wrestlers and features for its day, and on that count alone it might be worth a sample if you don't mind a grapple system that's all about the mash and how you button it. But if you already have or played the 16-bit versions, there's really nothing in this 32X Raw that merits an upgrade. Unless you really need more Quang in your life or something. I don't know, I've got nothing. Good night.